I can remember when I had a car way back in the 50s, and I could pull into a gas station and order $1 worth, and I'd get 5 gallons of gas, and the guy would wipe the windshield and check the oil and so forth for $1. Right? Certainly not the case today. So gas was 20 cents a gallon, right? And you know what? It's still 20 cents a gallon. If you use 2 pre-1965 silver dimes, you can get that much gas for those 2 silver dimes, right? Because silver is real money, and what we have in our pockets and purses today is not real money, it's make-believe money. Right? What has happened is inflation. Now, there are people who all the time talk about inflation, that it's rising prices, and therefore it's inflation. That is not the definition of inflation. Inflation, if you have that as the problem, rising prices, then who do you blame? Well, you blame the grocer and the gas station attendant, the landlord, or the employer who can't give you a raise. Right? So what is inflation? Correct definition: an increase in the quantity of currency. Blame the counterfeiter, the government and its partner, the Federal Reserve, for flooding the nation with totally unbacked currency. Right? We'll get into the fact that the currency used to have gold behind it, used to have silver behind it. Now it has a promise of a politician behind it. And that's not good. Right? That's not so good. So, correct definition of inflation is absolutely essential. Right? Now, maybe you've seen this cartoon, The Wizard of Id. Right? Is the guys are yelling, "What are you going to do about inflation?" And the king says he's going to print more money. We can't do that, sire. Why not? There's no gold to back it up. And the king says, "Phew, for a minute I thought we ran out of paper." During the lifetime of many Americans, certainly in my lifetime, the U.S. has gone from being the greatest creditor nation, where people owed us money, with the most respected currency, and now we're the greatest debtor nation with an increasingly devalued currency. 1 trillion is 1 with 12 zeros. That's an incomprehensible number. 1 trillion can be expressed as 1,000 billion, or 1,000,000 million, or 1,000 trillion. It's kind of ridiculous to even get into it. Inflation can destroy a nation, right? If you give somebody the power to flood the nation with unbacked currency and so forth, you can destroy the nation. There's a man named Henry Hazlitt who was a good guy. 1946, he wrote an article. And he said, inflation tears apart the whole fabric of stable economic relationships. It drives men toward desperate remedies. It leads men to demand totalitarian controls. It ends invariably in bitter disillusion and collapse. Now, we give an example of that. That's pretty visible there. What you see is the value of the Reichsmark in Germany. Now, after World War I, Germany was devastated, and they owed a lot of money. And so what did they do? They just ran the printing presses. There was no gold behind the money. There was no silver behind the money. There was nothing of value behind the money. Right? So you see what happened. They went from January of 1922, when $1 was the equivalent of 109 Reichsmarks. And then you can see how it grew from April and then into 1923, when it was 7,000 Reichsmarks, the equivalent of $1 US. And then finally it got down to 4 trillion and so forth. And finally they said, well, we have to revalue the currency. So what they did was they said, from now on, 1 trillion Reichsmarks equals 1 new Rentenmark. Right? And that was supposed to solve any problem. What did it do? Well, it destroyed anybody who owned property. It destroyed people's homes. It just destroyed. And what Hazlitt said is it leads men to demand totalitarian controls. Now, because of what happened in Germany, the people were demanding totalitarian controls, right? Who ended up in charge of Germany? Who said that? Right? A fellow named Adolf Hitler, right? And the people chose him because of what the others had done to them, and they thought Hitler was the answer. So Hazlitt was right. People demand totalitarian controls. Here's the chart again. Here's a picture of a woman on the left here, and she's heating the home by stuffing in bundles of currency, bundles of Reichsmarks that were worth nothing. Right? Here's some boys over here that they made a game out of piles of Reichsmarks, and they're building a little fortress with it. Right? The money was worthless. The money was, now, if you don't have money, how are you going to conduct business? How are you going to buy vegetables? How are you going to buy food? How are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to heat your home if you don't have the money, right? Well, here's Zimbabwe, country in Africa. Got taken over by some communists. They destroyed the country there. And so they came out and they actually printed currency that said $100 trillion. That was Zimbabwe dollars, it wasn't US dollars. But, and the chaos there. I met a man one time and he had what I would call a British accent. So I said to him, I said, well, let me guess. You could be from Australia, you could be from England, you could be from some other places. And I said, I'm going to guess Australia. I even mentioned South Africa, you know. And he said, you're wrong. He said, I'm from Zimbabwe. I said, oh my gosh. I said, I know what's happening over in Zimbabwe. And he said, yeah, it's terrible. He said, but my parents are still there. I said, well, how do they survive? He said, I have to send them money. I have to send them US money because the money in Zimbabwe isn't worth anything. The shelves were all bare in the supermarkets. The transportation system had broken down. Everything was just chaos. You can destroy a nation by destroying its currency, and that's what's happening to America. Right? In 1913, the US dollar was worth 100 pennies. In 2013, it was now worth 2 pennies. What I could buy back when I was a youngster now costs 10 times, 20 times the amount of dollars. Right? Now, money developed after a system called barter. And barter is simply swapping. All right? And when you swap, see, a farmer would go to a shoemaker and he would say, I'll give you so many cores of wheat, or so many, or I'll give you an animal that you can butcher, or something like that. If you can give my family a bunch of shoes, and everybody will have shoes. That's barter. There's no money involved, right? But when you have barter, you need a double coincidence of wants. You have to have somebody who wants something and somebody on the other side who wants something, and you got to be able to match the wants, and it's not easy to do. So the solution was to create a medium for exchange, something that everybody would trust. That's what money is, a medium for exchange. Okay? There are 3 types of money. There's commodity money, there's fiduciary money, and there's fiat money. Right? So let's talk about those 3. Commodity money is gold or silver. And it can be coins, or it can be bars, it could be platinum, it could be something else, right? But it's a commodity. And you might have paper bills to say, this paper bill is worth so many ounces of this commodity, right? And if it's honest, that's perfectly okay. So commodity money is what we used to have in the United States. We don't anymore, right? Then you have fiduciary money. The Latin word fiduciary means trust, right? So fiduciary money is an intrinsically valueless, but honest substitute for commodity money. Fiduciary money is based on trust. Can it be exchanged for commodity money? Yeah. Gold or silver genuine gold certificates, genuine silver certificates, and so forth. So fiduciary money is okay, right? And then there's fiat money. Fiat money is like monopoly money. You play a game of Monopoly, right? You got the money, try to buy something with it, right? You can't go down to the store and buy a Big Mac or a Coke or whatever. So fiat money is a valueless substance made legal tender by law. The government says you've got to accept this kind of money. It becomes money as a result of government fiat, an edict, right? Not redeemable in either commodity or fiduciary money, right? Now, over the course of history, there were various commodities that were used as money. Seashells, for example, were used as money in one small place in the world. Tobacco was used as money. Nails were used as money. To the time of the founding of our country, nails were very, very valuable, and they were used like money. Right? Salt was used. In fact, we get the word salary from the Latin word for salt. Right? Cattle were used. Right? Now, all of these different commodities that were used, there were problems. Right? The seashells would break. The tobacco would rot. The nails, somebody would use them to build a house, so you didn't have the money anymore. The salt, well, salt became very, very plentiful, very easy to inflate. And cattle, right? If you wanted to exchange your cow for a couple of pairs of shoes or something like that, you had to kill the cow, right? And you didn't have the cow anymore. So there were always problems with it. So what happened? Commodities were eventually chosen to be the money. And the best that ever been chosen are gold and silver. Now why? Why choose these metals? Well, first of all, they're divisible. You can have a big coin, you can have a small coin. You can have a gold bar, right? And then same with silver. They're transportable, right? You don't have to worry about the cow. You don't have to worry about killing the cow. They're durable, they're scarce, and so forth. One of the reasons that gold is so precious is because it's hard to find, and there's not very much of it. So that's what you want in money. You want those characteristics: divisibility, transportability, durability, and scarce. You know, if you're going to the market, you're not going to carry around two cows with you. Right? Now, the United States dollar was defined in the Currency Act in 1792. It said that the U.S. dollar is 371.25 grains of silver. The U.S. Mint Act of 1792. Now that's an unusual number. How did they get that? Well, what they did at the time was they took some of the Spanish doubloons and the currency that was being used in our country at the time, and they decided, they weighed 10 of them, and the average of the 10 of them came out to 371.25 grains of silver. Right? Grain of silver is a very small amount of silver. But that's the definition of the U.S. dollar. Is that being adhered to today? No. Right? Is it still the law of the United States of America? Yes. Would we be better off if we got back to that? Boy, would we ever be better off if we got back to that. Right? All right, now, here's some of the things that can happen. Here's an article from the New York Times, March 9th of 2009. Fed will inject $1 trillion more to aid the economy. Right? And you see that I highlighted a portion of it, and then I blew it up on the left here. As a way of getting more dollars into the economy, a tactic that amounts to creating vast new sums of money out of thin air. All right, now, they create $1 trillion more dollars, and they flood the country with them. What does that do to your dollars? It makes your dollars less valuable. And there's the effect of inflation. In fact, if you take any commodity You take shoes, sneakers, ballpoint pens, whatever, and you flood the country with them, what's the value of each of them going to be? It's going to be less. That's what inflation does. Now, this is an article by a man named Edmund L. Andrews, and it made the front page of the New York Times. I was amazed when I saw this, right? And then a little bit later, I was amazed again, right? Because Edward L. Andrews wrote another article. The U.S. plans $800 billion in lending to ease the crisis, right? Lending, creating 800 million more dollars, which lowered your value, the value of your dollars and my dollars and everybody's dollars. You know, if you flood the country with any product, the value of each one of those products will go down, right? Now, something else happened here that's interesting. I mentioned the name of the guy who wrote the articles, Edmund L. Andrews. Pretty soon, he wasn't working for the New York Times anymore. He was too honest, right? And maybe the editor that allowed that to be on the front page of the New York Times, maybe he got fired too, I don't know. But he was gone. Now, here's a chart, and it shows the value of the US dollar. It goes back to 1913, when the Federal Reserve was started. And you can see that the value of the US dollar stayed fairly stable. It didn't rise much. And you get all the way up to 2008, 2009, and you see it just shoots through the roof, right? And there's a new chart that came out recently, and I wasn't able to put it into my computer, but that mark that went up has gone a lot higher. It's gone off this chart, right? So that the dollar that was worth 100 cents in 1913 is now worth 2 cents. Right? And don't blame the grocery guy, and don't blame the gas station attendant, and don't blame the guy who you have to pay rent to or whatever. Blame the people who create the money and have destroyed the American system. Right? Here's another chart. Right? Oh, this is the second chart. I did put it in there. You can see the first big bounce was the one we had on the other chart, and now you can see it's gone way up much higher. Okay, now let's go over some money. This is a Federal Reserve note. This is what you carry in your pocket or your purse today. If you have a 20, that's what it looks like. Right? That's Andrew Jackson on the cover, on the front of it. A Federal Reserve note. Right? What does it say? Well, the law says that Federal Reserve notes, FRNs, shall be redeemable in lawful money. So if you take a $20 bill like that one into a bank and you'd say, I'd like some lawful money, they'll give you 21s, which are also Federal Reserve notes. And you just don't get what you really want is real money, and you don't get it, right? Now, let's go to the next kind. The law says that Federal Reserve notes are legal tender. The law is not needed if Federal Reserve notes were dollars. You wouldn't have to pass a law to say that these are good money. But the Federal Reserve notes enjoy a monopoly. All paper money that we use in our country today is Federal Reserve notes. The U.S. Constitution says Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix a standard of weights and measures. Okay? Does it say Congress shall have the power to create money? No. Congress shall have the power to coin money. Right? Now, what is coin money? What does that mean? Well, when they made that Constitution in 1787, it was ratified in 1789. One of the first things that Congress did was pass the U.S. Mint Act, 1792. The U.S. Mint set up a mint where the people could take their gold and their silver to the mint and have it smashed into coinage of a fixed size, weight, and value. Right? And it was free. You didn't have to pay for the government to do that for you. And that's the only function of government regarding money that was given to the government of the United States by the Constitution. Okay? You'll see as we go along here that they never gave the permission to start a Federal Reserve, and yet we have a Federal Reserve. So Congress shall have the power to coin money, right? Coin money doesn't mean create. It means to take silver or gold and smash it into coins, right? Regulate the value thereof. What they meant by that was if there were Spanish doubloons that were still in our country and currency from some other country, and so which is what we were using in our country until we had the Constitution and we had our own money system, then you had to know if the U.S. dollar, what it was equivalent to value of the U.S. of the doubloons or something else. You had to know, and so the Congress would say that one Spanish doubloon was worth $2.50 or whatever. Okay? And then it said, and a foreign coin, they had to fix the value of the foreign coin. And then they had to fix the standard of weights and measures. They had to say that 12 inches for a foot and so many ounces for a pound and so on. And when they did that, then stability came. Our country had stability, and our country took off. Right? Good money is not the product of advancing civilization. Good money is the cause of advancing civilization. Okay? So, I've already made this. The Constitution says coin money, not create money. Right? All right, now here's a U.S. Treasury gold certificate in 1907. It says on it at the top, I don't think you can read the very top of it, it says, this certifies that there have been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. Right? That's the finest paper money that the world has ever known. Right? You could take that and you could go to a bank, you could go to any place, and you could exchange it for real gold, commodity money. Right? 1907, it's gone. We don't have that kind of money anymore. Right? Right? Then we had silver certificates. Says the same thing about silver. Again, this is a U.S. Treasury note. It says this certifies there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Well, that's good money. Right? That's the money that was existing when I was born. Right? 1935. Now you know how old I am. Right? Right? Federal Reserve started in 1913. Right? It never should have started. It never should have begun. And there's a long story about how it did start and how it began. A bunch of lies and a bunch of promises that were never kept and so on. So Federal Reserve notes started in 1913. But they were existing alongside U.S. Treasury gold certificates and silver certificates. So the first Federal Reserve notes that came out, this one is in 1928, it too said redeemable in gold on demand by the U.S. Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. Right? So the Federal Reserve was putting out good money for a time. Until 1933, when President Roosevelt took us off the gold standard, and then the Federal Reserve notes no longer said that. So here's a Federal Reserve note now in 1934. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the U.S. Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank. Right? An interesting thing happened. A fella took a $20 bill to a bank in after 1934, and he plunked it up on the counter, and he said to the girl, he said, "I'd like some lawful money for this, please." And she said, "Well, what do you want, 2 5s or 2 10s or 4 5s or a combination?" No. It says lawful money. I don't want any of that. And she said, "Well, what is it you want?" I said, "I want lawful money." And she said, "Just a minute, please, just a minute." She went and got the boss. So the boss came out and he said, "What can I do for you, sir?" He said, "I'd like some lawful money for my 20. And the man said, "Well, what do you consider lawful money?" He said, "Gold or silver?" He said, "Well, I can't give you that." He said, "You answered my question." He took his 20 and out the door he went. Right? that was happening all over the country. People were finding out that the money wasn't what it was supposed to be anymore, right? So finally the Federal Reserve notes came out. Now this is the 20 and the one that we have in our pockets and so forth today. And all it says on it is this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and you don't have any choice, right? And the value of that continues to shrink. Why does it continue to shrink? Because there are so many of them in circulation. And what's the limitation on them as to how many they can put into circulation? There is no limitation at all. So our future is being stolen from us. Right? Everything of value is going to be taken from us, or it's going to simply rot and go away. The Federal Reserve is an unelected few appointed to its board of governors by the president for 14-year terms. They decide the amount of currency, they establish the value of the currency, they set the interest rates, they create booms and busts, and we've gone through that. Even in your lifetimes, we've had a terrible bust, and then we recover and we're getting ready for another bust. Right? The Federal Reserve is the brainchild of Edward Mandell House, President Wilson's top advisor. He wrote in his own 1912 book, Philip Drew Administrator, that he was working for socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx, founder of communism. Edward Mandell House later founded the Council on Foreign Relations. You heard me before, I said, if you're going to read any book to get started in understanding all of what's happening, get the book called The Shadows of Power by James Burlough. And then get my book, right? All of my books. Get all of my books after that, right? Now, there's the Communist Manifesto. I know we had a copy over there. Somebody bought it, so I can't show you to it. Came out in 1848. Written by the two founders of communism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, right? The famous 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. I won't go through them all, right? But number 2 says a heavy progressive income tax. You know, we have that, don't we? Right? Number 5 says centralization in credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Oh my golly, we got that too, don't we? Right? It's called the Federal Reserve, right? Number 10, free education for all children in public schools. The word public should be taken out of there and put government. Right? Okay. How many of you go to public school? All right? Fewer and fewer. Every time I go to a camp, there are fewer and fewer. A lot of people. How many are homeschooled? Many more are homeschooled. Right? You're lucky. You're fortunate. Right? Now, a few people saw the danger. Go back way back to 1913. There was a senator named Henry Cabot Lodge from Massachusetts. His son later became a vice presidential candidate. He said, this bill to create the Federal Reserve seems to me to open the way to a vast inflation of the currency. He was dead on, wasn't he? Right? Then there was Charles Lindbergh Sr., the father of the famous aviator. He was a congressman from Minnesota. He said, this new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation. Absolutely. So some people saw it, but most in Congress went along and they created the Federal Reserve. Here's another man who saw the danger as late as 1968, Wright Patman, a Democrat from Texas. He said, in the United States today, we have in effect 2 governments. We have the duly constituted government, then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, in many respects, is more powerful in our country than the United States Congress. Right? So you want to learn about it. You want to find out what you can about it. Congressman Ron Paul came out with a bill that said, audit the Fed. Right? He ran for president a few years ago. When was that now? 2012.
2008, Minnesota, you spoke.
2012 was the great. They had the Rally for the Republic in Minnesota, and they invited me as one of the speakers. There were about 15 speakers, right? In the middle of my speech, I told me that I had 20 minutes, right? In the middle of my speech, I said, it's time to end the Fed. And all of a sudden, everybody in the audience started cheering, end the Fed, end the Fed, end the Fed. I finally went, hey, stop, I only got 20 minutes. That was an audience of 12,000 people. It's the largest audience I ever spoke to. Here's National Geographic magazine. Now, some of you know this magazine, I would guess, right? They have interesting things about geography and so forth. They had an interesting article about the Federal Reserve. And it was honest. It absolutely stunned me when I saw this. A man named Peter T. White, who worked for the National Geographic magazine, wrote an article called The Power of Money. And in his article, he relates that he had just been told by a Fed official that the Fed had purchased $100 million in treasury bills from some securities dealers, and he related his exchange with the Fed officials as follows. Now, try to follow this, okay? Peter White says, where did the Fed get that $100 million? And the Fed official says, we created it. He means that anytime the central bank writes a check, so to speak, it creates money. It's money that didn't exist before, he says. So Peter White says, is there any limit on that? And the federal official says, no limit, only the good judgment and conscience of the responsible Federal Reserve people. Sleep well, my friends. Sleep well, right? And he said, well, where did you get this vast authority? He said it was delegated to them in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, based on the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Is that what, did the Constitution give Congress the right to do what the Federal Reserve does? No. And so they delegated that power to the Federal Reserve, but they didn't have it in the first place. They created whole new powers, and now we have inflation and so forth. Now, here's a clock that exists in New York City. It's near Times Square in New York City, and it reports the national debt. Now, back when this article was published, this is quite an old article, it was $3 trillion. The national debt was $3 trillion. And it kept growing and growing. Finally, it got past 9, it got to 10, and they had to shut the machine down and create a new digit space to the left of the 3 there. So then when they finally got it up running again, they were able to put the number 10. The number now is 18. It continues to grow, right? Go back to the U.S. Constitution. The states were also required to obey the Constitution. And the Constitution says no state shall coin money, no state shall emit bills of credit, that's inflated currency, or make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment of debts. That's the U.S. Constitution. Now, the states that created the Constitution were very, very jealous about their powers. And that the men who went from each of the states to the Constitutional Convention would submit to that. A very strong prohibition on them was significant. And it shows the character of the people who created the Constitution of the United States. They would even limit their own power. Bills of credit is paper money. Real money is gold and silver. The attitude of the founders regarding paper money. If you asked any one of them, they would say, no thanks, right? Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut said, bar the door against paper money. James Wilson of Pennsylvania said, remove the possibility of paper money. Pierce Butler of South Carolina, disarm the government of such power. And John Langdon of New Hampshire, I love this one. He said he would reject the whole Constitution if it didn't have a prohibition against creating paper money. They had lived through an era of paper money. The government of the United States financed the war for independence with what they call continental currency. And I'm old enough to remember my parents and grandparents, they used to use the phrase that something was not worth a continental. They weren't talking about an automobile. That they knew, and that phrase was very well, very, very common back then. You don't hear it anymore. right? I guess it's against the law. But National Geographic magazine told the truth. Where did the Fed get that $100 million? We created it. Is there any limit on that? No limit. Where'd you get this authority? They got it from a portion of the Constitution that didn't give them that authority. They say it gives them that authority. All right? Now let's define wealth. All right? You talk about wealth, and a lot of people will say wealth is a table full of stocks and bonds and holdings and so forth. A table full of paper documents. No. Wealth is productivity. That nation is a wealthy nation whose people produce the goods of the earth, from the earth. They take the goods, the products in the earth, and they fashion it into products, goods, right? And they feed their animals, and they create food, and so on. Wealth is productivity. Okay? Manufacturing, mining, agriculture, so forth. Try to remember that. Right? Wealth is productivity. Over the past 30 years, manufacturing jobs have declined from 19 million in our country to 13 million. We're not making as many things as we used to make. Right? My wife bought me a Marine Corps shirt. I was a Marine back in the 50s. My wife bought me a Marine Corps shirt. And I looked at the label and it said it was made in Vietnam. I go, oh my gosh, right? How many Marines died in Vietnam? You know the story. You look at the label and you try to find out where it came from. Bangladesh, right? Sri Lanka, right? Bolivia, right? Why don't we make things in the United States anymore? Because the leaders of our country are trying to destroy our country. And they're trying to destroy the wealth producers in our country. So we have what is called outsourcing, NAFTA, the World Trade Organization, and other international, stifling taxation and regulation with OSHA and EPA and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I had a friend one time, he told me EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He said, no, it means eliminate every other Caucasian. Some experts want our nation to become a service economy. A nation of paper pushers, not producers. That would destroy our nation. That would be the end of the United States of America. Here's the kind of people that Obama picked for his economic team. Timothy Geithner, Lawrence Sumner, Paul Volcker. They're all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. I keep going back to how important that book, The Shadows of Power, is. Right? Paul Volcker actually said the standard of living of the average American has to decline. I don't think you can escape that. He said that in testimony before a United States Congressional Committee. And everybody thought he was wonderful, or at least most of them. The standard of living has to decline. I don't want to see it decline. Now we have a new Secretary of the Treasury, Jack Lew. He was appointed in 2013 by Obama, and he's another CFR member, so he'll go along with the program. Now I want to tell you what happened to Japan. Japan, before 1992, was buying up America. They bought Rockefeller Center. They bought golf courses and hotels in California. They were buying up everything. Right? All of a sudden, they had a recession. What they were doing was they were buying it with paper money. Right? So they decided, okay, we have a recession now. People are getting wise to our Japanese yen, right? That it's not really worth what we say it was worth. So they had stimulus packages. What did they do? They increased the money supply, they cut interest rates, they had public works spending, bailouts of corporations. They said some companies were too big to fail. Right? 23 years later, no, it's now more than 23. It's now 8 and 16, it's 24 years later. Right? 23, Japan is still in the recession. Japan is still in the recession. So what happened in the United States? Well, we had a recession. So what did we do? We did exactly what Japan did. And the results in America here are no different, right? And we still have a recession. Here's the book, vitally important book, The Shadows of Power. Now the national debt, after Jimmy Carter was president, almost reached 1 trillion. Hadn't reached 1 trillion. After Ronald Reagan, 8 years, it was now 2.6 trillion. After Bush won, Papa Bush, 1993, it was 4.1 trillion. After Clinton, he had 8 years, it went to 5.6 trillion. After the second Bush, it went to 10.6 trillion. Now Obama, 18.1 trillion, and he ain't done yet. He ain't done yet. What does this mean? It means that you owe it, right? And you're going to have to pay it much more than I am. I'm not going to live much longer. But you've got a whole life ahead of you. And you people, your future has been mortgaged. Right? Now, I don't mean that to tell you that to scare you. What I tell you that my purpose is to energize you. Right? Become aware. Start helping other people to become aware. I'm going to show you a book I wrote on this subject over there before we go. All right? The U.S. national debt was 16 trillion in 2012. It's now 18 trillion. 19, excuse me. Right? This was July 6th of this year, just a few days ago. 19 trillion. The estimated population of the United States is 323 million people. So each citizen's share of this debt is $59,785. You owe it, I owe it, a little baby that's born yesterday owes that much, $59,785. I want you to pay that debt before you leave the room here.
See Mr. Everett?
No way. See Mr. Everett? Is the Chancellor of the Exchequer over here, Mr. Charles Everett. My friends, I hope I'm getting through to you. I hope you're beginning to understand that your future is being mortgaged. Right? July 6th of 2016, the admitted debt is 19.3 trillion. And then you have to add the unfunded obligations that the government already has. The government has already promised to pay so much more, and it's well over 100 trillion. And so the figures that we've given you aren't really honest because the government owes those as well. The Obama administration, the U.S. bond rating was lowered. First time in my lifetime, the U.S. bond value was lowered from AAA to AA. It was significant. Greek bonds have been declared junk. Right? U.S. debt is 32 times the Greek debt, and the Greek debt has been declared junk. What about the American debt? Right? What is the Obama administration doing? They're creating entitlements. I hate that word. Right? Social Security, Medicare, all kinds of things, you know. Get the people dependent on the government, and then we can rule them. Right? And they can do that. So they must borrow, and they continue. The Constitution, let's go back to it. No state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Right? So some states are starting to think about this. Utah, they said no taxation on gold or silver. South Carolina, House okayed gold and silver as money. 10 other states are moving this way, and that's good. That's very good. We'd like to see that. Bad solution. United Nations to the rescue. Right? There are people already suggesting that the United Nations come in and take over the economic system of our country. No, we don't want that. The International Monetary Fund. So what must be done? Restate the definition of the dollar. 371.25 grains of silver. Right? Just restate it and get people to realize it. Allow private coinage. Right? If I don't want the Federal Reserve making money, who should make money? My answer to that is anybody who wants to, as long as they're making commodity money. Right? So a private mint should spring up here, and a private mint over here, and they're making gold coins, and they're making silver coins, and so forth. And this is happening. There are people who are doing that. and the government is trying to shut them down. Then we have to cancel legal tender laws. That's a subject. Restate the ban on the bills of credit. The founding fathers of the United States called paper money bills of credit. And you'll see that term in the Constitution. Abolish the Federal Reserve, terminate unconstitutional programs, cancel the income tax. Right? That's what we should do. That's the way we should be aiming. Paul Ryan is now the Speaker of the House. He said we don't need to balance the budget until the year 2040. Incredible. Balanced budget amendment? No, we don't want a balanced budget amendment because there's all kinds of loopholes in a balanced budget amendment. Plan for victory. We take our country back through the House of Representatives. Right? I've told people for years, don't expect to steal the presidency. Right? We take our country back through the House of Representatives. Because the House of Representatives, in Article 1, Section 7, it says all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. Right? So the House of Representatives doesn't originate a bill for foreign aid, or the Department of Education, or the Department of Housing, or anything else. That's it. Right? Nothing else has to happen. I went to a fourth grader one day, and I said to the fourth grader, I said, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? I'm thinking about foreign aid. We give foreign aid to all kinds of countries, right? And yet we're heavily in debt. So I asked the fourth grader, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? And he looked at me like that and he said, no! I said, good. Would you like to run for Congress? That's what we need. Robert Welch said, withdraw from the United Nations. We're getting closer, right? There was a vote in the United States House of Representatives to withdraw in 1997, 1999, 2003, 2004. You see the number keeps growing. In 2011, they had a vote, right, just to cease funding, which is essentially getting out of the United Nations. How many would you guess voted for it? 177, right? Is there any hope? Of course there's hope, right? So what we got to do is get more congressmen today. What we need is 218 in the House and an equal number, a majority in the Senate, and we get out. There's that wonderful sign, get us out of the UN, right? Needed, abolish the departments of energy, housing, commerce, interior, education, stop foreign aid, abolish the TSA at the airport, let the airlines provide security, allow private coinage, abolish the Fed, cancel the income tax. Meyer M. Rothschild, the great banker from Europe, bad man, let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. Right? There's David Rockefeller. We talked about that. Lost awareness. All right. America became great not because of what government did, but because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution. Right? Now I'm going to do a little sales pitch here. I want to tell you what I got from a couple of books over there. Here's the book, Financial Terrorism, and in the book there are pictures of the money, just like I showed in the thing here. I don't know what page it is, but all of the pictures that I showed in the slides are in the book. Financial Terrorism, Hijacking America Under the Threat of Bankruptcy. Right? As a course in economics you won't get in most colleges. I have some booklets over there. The book costs $5. Here's a book called Republic, If You Can Keep It. I think some of you probably already know what that's about. And there's several other books. Each of those booklets are worth $2. I have 4 different DVDs of speeches that I have given. 2 of the speeches that I have given here at this class, at this camp, are in the package. One's about the neocon agenda, and that's something you want to learn about too. So we sell all 4 of those in the package for $8. With that said, How can all this be explained? Our leaders aren't stupid. They aren't ignorant of facts. There's design, and design equals conspiracy, a secret plot among more than one person for an evil purpose. Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but that the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education." That's why we formed the John Birch Society. There's Robert Welch. There's a conspiracy at work as sure as there is a law of gravity. I love that. He's absolutely right. John Birch Society, education our strategy, truth our weapon. Come join us, so forth. And thanks very much for your close attention.